I'm Diane, I'm Executive Director of Nursing, AHPs and Quality, and I would like to introduce...
Hi, my name is Suzette and I'm currently a professor at Imperial College, but I work all over the country in anything related to patient safety.
A number of questions I want to ask you because I want to share your expertise. So could you describe Safety 1 and Safety 2? What's the difference? What's it all about?
Okay. I have to kind of start right at the very beginning. That sounds a bit boring, but there's a little bit of history. So Safety 1 and Safety 2 is the new terminology that somebody called Eric Holnagel came up with about 10 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And we also what's this? And he basically described it as Safety 1 is about where you look at failure, and Safety 2 is where you might look at success. But actually it's so much more than that. So what we mean by Safety 1 and Safety 2 is Safety 1 is the current predominant approach that we do with safety, which is we collect incidents and claims and complaints and all of the aspects that we know can harm patients, and absolutely the right thing to do. We need to understand those things. But what Eric and others and what we've been looking at over the last 10 years is, but if that's a percentage of the care that we provide, what's going on in the other percentage? Yeah. So if we took it very simply, that 10% say of our patients are being harmed by the care being provided to them, what's happening in the 90%? So we want to ask that question, and that asks us to look at safety with a slightly different mindset, which is, if the 90% is functioning and going okay, not necessarily amazingly, but it's going okay, what can we learn about that? And then what can we learn about how it fails? So what you do is a different mindset. You go, something's failed this time, but actually most of the time it goes okay. So what's the difference this time? A really lovely analogy that somebody called Mariette DeVos uses is Safety 1 is like studying a really good marriage by simply asking your friends who are divorced. Whereas in fact, what she says is you want to ask your friends who are divorced because they might give you a few tips along the way. But Safety 2 will actually steer you to ask, of all of those wonderful people that have had years and years of marriage, how did you make that succeed? And it starts to tell you how your system is working in totality, not just when it fails.
That makes sense. So does that mean that we wouldn't have Safety 1?
No, it doesn't.
No.
So there's a bit of a myth. So one of the myths is that it's just about looking for success. And success being, it's always going to be right, and we know that's not going to happen. And the other myth is that Safety 2 takes over Safety 1, and it doesn't, it's both. There was another little myth, which is, well, if it's Safety 1 and Safety 2, surely therefore it's Safety 3, but we're not going to go there. So Safety 2 embraces Safety 1. It says, we get it. You need to understand failure. We need to collect all of those things. We owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to our patients. Mind you, we owe it to them and ourselves to do it really well, and at the moment we're slightly struggling with Safety 1. And then it asks us to look at it in a different mindset for Safety 2. The final thing is that people think it might be a little bit of an initiative or an intervention. And for me, it feels like a much more of a mindset than a project, as in you'll do Safety 2. You'll embody Safety 2 in your mindset associated with safety.
Yeah. No, thank you. Why is it the way we treat each other has such a significant impact on patient safety?
Well, we know from all of the research over the last 20, 30 years that the way we behave towards each other impacts on our safety in both good and bad. So if I'm kind to you and I'm compassionate to you, I value you, I'm grateful, I really listen, and I care about your well-being and everything that's going on, and I don't judge you in the way that we might judge people, you're going to feel supported, you're going to feel you can trust me, you're going to feel like I've got your back. And that relaxes you, that makes you feel more comfortable in what you're doing, and you perform better when you're like that. We know that it makes a significant difference. Kindness, as soft as that sounds, makes a significant difference to our performance. So if we know all of that, we also know the opposite is true. So if I intimidate you, if I harass you, if I sneer at you because I don't like what you said, if my response to you is to shut you down and silence you, you will instantly feel different, intimidated, silenced, and that's utterly awful for safety. Because if you don't feel that you can say to me, "Oh, Suze, I think you might just be about to make a mistake," if you fear saying that, you're not going to tell me. I'm going to end up by possibly making that mistake. So it's not good for me, but it's definitely not good for anyone else.
Yeah.
And so we know that if you want to get the fancy terminology, our cognition gets affected when we feel we are belittled or we are humiliated. People are incivil to us or rude to us. And our cognition stops working as well as it could, i.e. we don't think very clearly.
Yeah.
And the final bit of that equation is we actually don't work in a very simple system. Everyone I'm speaking to via this will know, of course we don't. We work in a very complex adaptive system. And if you're working in that complex system and somebody makes it hard for you to think, therefore make decisions and choices, again, it will impact on safety.
Sometimes people say that it's wonderful to be kind and it's wonderful to be compassionate, but does that mean that we're never honest with our feedback and it doesn't mean that we manage people? What's your view on that?
I think that's a really good point. I think that's the other issue that some people say about psychological safety, which is if we make it all terribly psychologically safe for anyone, does that mean that we don't want to hear any bad news? Or if we hear any bad news, we might be worried about it. But equally, there's another phrase that people say is, well, if everyone always challenges us, does that mean we have to accept the challenge? And go, oh yes, of course I'll change because you want me to.
Yeah.
So let's dispel all of that. Being kind to somebody doesn't mean that you cannot actually be clear with them. It doesn't mean that you can't tell them when you're not happy with their performance. In fact, if somebody's not performing very well, it's very kind of you to just sit down and say, hey, Suze, I've noticed that you're a bit tired or things aren't quite as good as they could be or whatever it is. Is there anything I can do to help you with that? That's a really kind way of actually saying, I don't think you're performing very well. But it isn't going around saying you're not performing very well. So it is all about the language that you use and the response that you give. That isn't about accepting every challenge. It isn't about also accepting bad performance or poor performance. It's about us all trying to decide what is the right thing for all of us.
Yeah.
So it's kind to help people find their way when they're not actually coping.
Thank you. How can we ensure that we take frontline staff with us on this improvement, around all the improvements we want to make around patient safety? Because sometimes it kind of gets stuck, doesn't it, at a middle layer, but we know that the people who make the biggest difference to the people we care for are those people in front of them. And they've usually got the best ideas as well. I don't think the best ideas come from boardrooms. They come from, people who do it every single day. They know best. So how are we going to get them?
So there's this whole kind of language in human factors, which all sounds a bit terminology-ish, which is the difference between work as done and work as imagined. So there's this thing where human factors people say that if you imagine what people's lives are like and you tell them this is what they need to do, or this is going to be better for them, if it doesn't actually match or fit with their work as done, what they actually do, it's very frustrating, it's very annoying, and everybody thinks, oh, they're asking us to do yet another intervention that really doesn't make that difference. So if you've got that, there's an easy answer to that. Actually find out what will make a difference. Find out what is their issue, what their problems are, really genuinely care about their day-to-day existence. And then find the solutions that really help. Or help them translate the solutions that you might be slightly made to do. If there's national initiatives that we've all got to do, we can sometimes interpret it, translate it for our frontline staff that says, this is how it's going to work for us here. And if it doesn't feel like it's working for you, you need to make sure that you feed it back to us so that this is a constant thing. If we can co-design, even better. But sometimes we get given things that we have to do, don't we? As opposed to being able to co-design right from the beginning. But even co-designing the implementation phase is really brilliant. There's a great whole world of implementation science that tells you just make sure it's better than the status quo, make sure that it really fits with the kind of things that makes a difference for them. Explain it. It's just rationale. Why are we doing this? You know, sometimes I hear people that, like, for example, with the patient safety incident response framework, people are going, well, I don't understand. What's the difference between that and the serious incident framework? It doesn't feel that much different. So why do I need to change all of this stuff? So we need to break it down and make it clear and really explain what it is. So we can do all of that. But it feels a constant for me. I don't think it's a, here you go, here's the initiative, we might have co-designed a bit of it and then leave it to you. I need to feel that you are constantly being kept in touch with how it's going and you can tell me how it is. And that's really reliant on something called the next work, which is work as disclosed. And work as disclosed is if they genuinely would tell you that it's not working, or it is working, or whatever it might be. And you will only have a culture where people can feel safe to share that with you if you make it so that they don't feel intimidated, and there are ways in which they feel they can speak up. So that's the linkages between implementation and psychological safety, so that you create, you don't imagine what their world is like, you help them do what their world is like, and then you help them disclose when it might not be working or when it is.
Thank you. This is a good question. What does being fair look like in the NHS?
So being fair, there's a whole thing about, do we have a blame-free culture or a no-blame culture or an open and fair culture? What kind of culture are we really searching for? And I think we've come to a place where we might have found it. So I think what we did was we sort of, if you imagine a pendulum, and we started the world about 30 years ago blaming most individuals when something went wrong, and then we swung it over and said, actually no, we don't want to blame anybody, this is not about blame. And then we started to realise, but we need some accountability, we need some responsibility, and we definitely need some learning. So we can swing that pendulum just a little bit, because there is always a line that some people might cross that isn't acceptable. If you swing the pendulum just a little way, what fairness looks like is where you describe what we describe as a restorative just culture, which is where people are treated kindly, all of those things I said at the beginning, that you don't judge them. We as human beings are very good at immediate judgment. It's just what we do. Like, why on earth did she do it like that?
Decision.
Why did she do it like that? And we're very good at taking our own biases and going, well, I would have never done that. And just looking at the situation as we know it, not the situation that they were in. And so fairness is saying, I want you to tell me what situation you were in, what it felt like, what happened, just why you made the choices that you make, and then we can go from there. Fairness is saying, I want you to be involved in this. This isn't about you over here. You're not going to be ostracised. I want you as part of this because you're part of the story. Of course you are. Fairness is also not only to our staff but our patients and their families. It's a huge deal, as it were, in making sure that people feel we're going to learn from it, but they will be treated fairly. Now there's a thing there that's vital, which is consistency. You won't feel that you're being treated fairly if you're treated differently from somebody in a different area to you, or a different profession, or maybe a different background, gender or ethnicity or so on. So it's where patient safety and the world of equality, diversity and inclusivity become merged, because you absolutely have to have everyone feeling like they're going to be treated in the same way as everyone else. So it is linking up. So that restorative just culture really tries to do that, create a healing culture when things don't go as planned.
So some people would say, how do you ensure that it's just for patients and families? And because there is that view, I believe totally, obviously in just and restorative, but it's about getting that balance, isn't it? And so what's your view about just for patients and carers?
Yes. So just is often linked to the word justice. But if we just take the word just, it's just an odd word when you really
It is really, isn't it?
You just take it in isolation. What an odd word. We need to ask them what they want. So it is basically, what do you want? in so many ways. How do you want to be communicated? How do you want to be involved? What's your bit of the story? And when do you want to hear from us? All of that kind of stuff. Bringing them in rather than sitting on the outside. Because ultimately what they want, and you know this from years of research, they want to understand what happened.
Yeah.
They want some acknowledgement that something did happen. And they want you to say sorry. Yeah. They don't necessarily want you to steer them down the complaints route, steer them down the litigation route. And they absolutely don't want to go down something that is extremely painful, such as things like litigation. So if you give them the information, and if you take your time to do that, and you constantly do that, constantly check in on whether you are meeting their needs, then it starts to feel not just, but also bespoke, personal.
Yeah.
Like, something happened to my mum, they are talking about my mum, they're talking about me and how it feels, and they're going to find out what happened to my mum and they're going to tell me, and I'm not going to feel like they're hiding anything.
Yeah.
That's I'm not saying any of this is easy. It is a really hard thing to do for anyone to try to do that when you've got a family who are more likely to be extremely upset or distressed or coping with some aspect of harm or loss. Another colleague of mine said beautifully that actually we also really, when we work in patient safety, need to really truly understand the world of grief. Those lessons that people have about how to help people when they're bereaved really help us think about talking to patients who've been harmed or people who have loved ones who've been harmed. Because even if they've not died, they are grieving for some aspect of their care or the harm they might receive. And I really like, again, bringing in those different things that add to the safety knowledge that we have in order to understand how we can work with and for our patients and our staff.
That's a really good point about the kind of the grief process. Families I meet are so incredibly dignified and demand very little but deserve so very much. And I think there is something about those honest conversations, as honest as you can be. But the question usually from people is why?
Yeah.
Why? And we all do it, don't we?
Yeah.
And we really want to understand the context. So I get what you're saying. Why is speaking up so important? And what may be people's barriers? What stops you speaking up?
Okay. So speaking up, intuitively we know surely that's incredibly important. But it's vital that we help people to do that. One of the things about it is that people use this throwaway line, all you need to do is speak up.
Yeah.
Well,
like it's that easy.
Yeah. And so what gets in the way is if I'm relatively junior, if I'm new to an organisation or new to a unit, that's going to slightly intimidate me. If I don't feel I know very much, so I'm taking part in a task that I know very, very little about. I'm going to assume everyone else knows more than I do. So I'm not necessarily going to say anything. We really feel intimidated by looking stupid as well, let alone the fear of somebody belittling you because you feel like you've looked stupid. I've been in so many meetings where everyone's used lots of jargon and lots of acronyms and they're all flying these things around and I'm sitting there going, I have no idea what they're talking about. And there are certain times in my life where I'm junior but even actually quite senior, I think I should know all of this. I'm whispering it because I should know all of this. So how stupid am I going to look when I say, I'm sorry, could you just explain what an ICB is or some other different acronym? And hopefully people are going, oh, so sorry. Absolutely. So there's something about the language that we use and the jargon that we use actually silences people. Big barrier. But it is beholden to everyone to help everyone. So I used to think it was like, if you're in a meeting, it's got to be the chair of the meeting or the facilitator, or whatever you might call that person. It's their responsibility to make sure everybody has something to say. Or if you're doing a handover or a huddle, somebody's deemed in charge and it's their responsibility. But actually it's everyone's, because we're all sitting there and we're all watching, and sometimes the person who's chairing it's got an awful lot in their head, and somebody else has noticed, oh, Suze hasn't said anything for a while, and I actually know that Suze is really good at this bit, so how do I draw her in? So it's up to us to draw other people in a kind way. You don't want to put anyone on the spot in a really difficult moment, but I have now realised from a number of pieces of work that we've done that if we all take that on us, that it is up to us to help make this a good conversation that everyone's had their chance to say, then people will open up or even say, no, I don't have anything to say that. So it's giving people the permission to do so. So as I say, the barriers, I go on and on, but the barriers are, being intimidated, being fearful, being more junior, sometimes even being more senior, and lack of knowledge or lots of knowledge, and the language that we use, all of those things get in the way.
And perceived consequences, I think, as well.
Yes. Then we get to the whole world of, if I speak up, will this damage my relationship with somebody, let alone maybe even my career.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.